Well, hello there. Welcome into Drummer Daily, the only podcast that I am the host of. That's a true statement. I kind of started saying that without actually thinking about how I was going to finish it. Hey, that's a good drumming lesson. Don't ever start a fill if you don't know how you're going to end it. Or don't, in my case, in this situation, don't ever start a sentence without knowing how you're going to end it. That can lead to bad things. I hope you're doing well. I'm sorry, I'm adjusting my mic here a little bit. I'm doing really well. This is episode number 154. So if I happen to mention anything in this podcast that you want to hear more about, or links to products or other resources, you can just go to danielhadaway.com/154 and check those out. So today I've got a question and from a awesome listener, and he and I went back and forth a few times on some emails, just some very detailed questions that are kind of specific, and the answers are kind of stuff that I don't want to talk about in public. But he asked me a different question that I thought was really interesting and something that I haven't heard many people talk about. So I thought this would be an awesome situation to address it. This podcast is, and he says this: is it typical of bands or artists and producers to hire multiple drummers on an album? Why and who makes that call? The artist, the producer? And that is a wonderful question. And I can only speak from my experience, and then also I will share with you just what I know happens based on other friends that I have that are drummers or artists or things like that. I will say that having multiple drummers, if you look at like A-list, big name, artists, they can have pretty much anyone record, they can hire any musician they want. They can have anybody. And so most artists that are like those big, almost like celebrity, like paparazzi following them around, those kinds of artists, as far as I know, and this again is just from people that I know, I don't think I've ever played for an artist that you consider like A-list, like that type of famous, with the unlimited resources to just get whoever they want. But in my experience, or knowing what goes on in that world, most of those artists are not recording an entire album, like the way that you might imagine an artist recording an album where they just go into the studio on a week or two or month and just record the whole album. Most of the time they're recording an album over many months, many different recording sessions, maybe even many different studios, a lot of times different producers. And so like the creation of an individual song for a record is kind of a whole experience in and of itself. And so nowadays a lot of artists are approaching the creation of a song or an album that way, that they approach it song by song. And so in the same way, football season's about to start, which is my favorite sport, American football. And the same way you have your offensive players, you have your defensive players, and even within those two sets, you have, you might have a different set of players that go in for a certain kind of play, or if you're going to have a running play where you're going to run it up the middle and try to power through somebody through the defense, you have a certain set of guys that are blocking. You might maybe have fewer receivers. You have a more powerful running back that you put in. But then in other situations where you're going to try to pass the ball down the field, you might have you might go for a different type of protection scheme, so different people on the field on your offensive line. You might have more wide receivers. You might only have one running back, and he might be a guy who is not as powerful of a truck, running through people, but might be more of a agile guy, so that he could also be a receiver. There's all these different situations where different plays call for different players, and in the same way, I think every song is kind of like that. For an artist, a lot of artists these days. And so honestly, it just comes down to, at the most basic level, like who's right for the song. And like I said, that kind of stuff, that kind of situation is not something that I have personal experience with, but I know people who've been in that situation. So it's more just like, hey, I got this song, who would be a really great drummer on this one song? And it's not so much like this is always my drummer and I have this person play. It's more just like, who's the studio guy that I want to play on this song? And a lot of artists like at that level too, they have a different, they have a live drummer that tours with them, and by necessity, you only have one drummer on the whole show, on a whole tour. But you can't switch out a drummer for every song on tour. That would be ridiculous. But in a studio, you absolutely can, and so you kind of just pick who you think is right or who the producer might think is right for that situation. Now, beyond that, I have been in situations where I've played for artists where the album recording is still spread out over a long period of time, and really when that situation comes up, switching out drummers, a lot of times in my experience, is more just out of practicality. It's more just you had one person playing on the album and we didn't finish tracking everything and in these few days, and so we're going to come back in a few months and do the rest of the album, and when we come back in a few months, that original drummer is on tour or is not available or a million other reasons why, and so that can be that's a more common reason why that happens, kind of in the world that I live in, where I'm still playing on albums with budgets, and people who have, they can get good studios and recording good studios and things like that, but it's not so just crazy over the top that it's like you just spend ridiculous amounts of money to get different guys in for every song and you spend years and years making an album. That's not the world that I live in. Beyond that, there's just a lot of interpersonal dynamics. There's just things that go on. You might, for whatever reason, you might have a guy who comes in and just, it's just not working out for whatever reason. It's not like the guy's not a good drummer or on another day would be the right drummer for that same project. But for a lot of art and music is something you can't put into a formula and write down and figure out. And so for whatever reason on a given day, something may not be working and you may just want a different approach on something. And so that happens. I'll tell you beyond that, just to kind of be something a little more fun and entertaining about this whole topic. I've done every kind of, if you could imagine a scenario of drummer being switched out with another drummer, and think, man, I wonder if that's ever happened. I've pretty much done all of those things at some point. I have played drum recording sessions where the producer won't admit it to me, but I know after hearing the final product that I actually got replaced by either a different drummer or got replaced by drum samples in a drum machine, and nothing that I played actually got used. I have been the guy who's been brought in to discreetly replace a band recording. It's like a band with a name band with a bunch of members and they have their own drummer. I've been brought in to discreetly copy but play with better feel the parts of a band that the drummer for the band, he just wasn't quite nailing the parts, and they were so off that they couldn't be fixed with a computer or something like that. And so they just bring me in, and I basically copy note for note what the other drummer played, but try to play it a little more accurately so that it lines up with everything else. I've done that. I'm trying to think of what else. There are songs that I've recorded where it is my right foot and my right hand, and another drummer's left foot and left hand. Basically mixing and matching different sessions with different drummers, different parts, all together in one song. And you name it. I've done. There's been crazy situations I've played in, and had a lot of those crazy situations happen to me too. And honestly, it's just at the end of the day, I'm not sure if this was in the question or not. I don't have it in front of me anymore. But another part of what we talked about, I know, in this email exchange was. How does that make me feel when that kind of stuff happens, or how does it make you upset or whatever? And the answer is early on it did make me upset a little bit, but I quickly learned that it doesn't just happen to me. These I play live for a band for a long time, and then when it comes to studio time, they have a different drummer playing the studio. Those kinds of things. It doesn't just happen to me. So it's not like it's not that I'm a bad drummer or I'm not good enough. It's just everyone chooses to make their music the way they make it. And it's the same way that I've said before in this podcast. I know people have said, oh, you shouldn't have to compromise on your music to become a professional. Like when I say you need to play more simply, play less notes, play less drum fills, play simple patterns, because that's what'll get you hired. People are like, oh, you shouldn't have to compromise. Well, at the end of the day, if I want to get hired by somebody else, I'm choosing to play their music. And so how they choose to make their music is their choice. And so, yeah, I actually do have to compromise a little bit. And if I overthink it, I can let myself get upset about something. But at the end of the day, I know that if I want to be in charge of what I play, then I should write my own songs, because otherwise every piece of music that I choose to be on as a drummer is a group effort. And so I have to be willing to defer to someone else's wishes, especially when I'm not in a band setting. I'm in a setting where there is someone who is the quote unquote artist. There is someone who is the producer, and what they say goes. So it used to make me upset, but it doesn't make me upset anymore, because I realize that's the way things work. And it's not. I'm not the first one that it's going to happen to. I'm not the last one that it's going to happen to. And it's happened to everybody of all skill levels and abilities. And it's really not an unfair thing. One thing I learned early on is that I can create, we have this tendency to create our own kind of expectations going into a situation. So going into my drumming career, I had this expectation of how it was going to be for me. And the more expectations that I had, the more disappointed, or the easier to become disappointed it was for me. And so I'm not saying don't expect anything, and you'll never be, you'll expect the worst to happen, and you'll never be upset. It's not that kind of thing. It's not a pessimistic view. It's just saying go into something optimistic, but don't expect things to happen for you in a certain way, and you can't get as disappointed. You won't get upset when things happen differently. So it's not about guarding yourself and putting walls up and being overly protective about yourself as a drummer and what you do. It's actually the opposite. It's about letting your guard down and just being willing to go with the flow and appreciate the opportunities that you are given, and not think about what you should have. Think about what you do have. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit in your pursuit as a professional drummer. I definitely appreciate you joining me today, and I can't wait to talk to you again really soon. Thanks for joining me though. Bye for now.